Welcome to our interview series on brave feminine leadership. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome to the conversation today Peter Harmer. Peter, thank you for joining.
It's a great pleasure, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So in this particular series, I've sort of used the line of no more secrets. Extraordinary leaders share their journey from good to great. And Peter, before we jump into the conversation, I might just briefly share with the audience just a brief bio so they're familiar with you. So Peter has over 40 years experience in the Australian and international insurance and financial sectors. Formerly, Peter was Chief Executive Officer of the Insurance Australia Group, IAG, CGU Insurance, Aon Limited UK, Aon Risk Services Australia Pacific, and Aon Re Australia, and has successfully led business growth agendas, major acquisitions and industry roll-ups. Today, Peter is a non-executive director involved with Commonwealth Bank, NIB Holdings, NIB Health Funds, AUB Group, Law Cover Limited, and is a board advisor for Bain & Company. Peter, thrilled to have you join the conversation with your extraordinary background and leadership. I'd just love to invite you firstly, for anyone in the audience who hasn't come across you before, let's just start with who are you as a person? You know, where do you come from? What's your background?
Oh, yes. Well, born in the country Victoria, schooled in Melbourne, met my wife of 40 years as of a couple of weeks ago at high school.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, I have three gorgeous children, one of whom lives in the UK, two of which have produced the requisite grandchildren. Last one was 2 weeks ago, so
wow,
we're all very happy. You know, I'm sort of really enjoying this transition from executive to non-executive life. Having a portfolio of activities, as they say, is hugely exciting, really challenging, and it feels like a great time of life.
Fantastic. Now you had, I remember when you and I first connected, there was a military stage of your background initially, I think.
Yes, I had a scholarship to the Royal Military College at Duntroon, and unfortunately, I loved it. Unfortunately, I fell very ill at the end of the first year. Spent quite a bit of time in hospital. Came back to Melbourne, as it was then, to my home to recuperate. Recuperation took a lot longer than anticipated. I took a transfer to the Portsea Officer Cadet School. By then, my girlfriend from high school, who is now my wife, returned from overseas, and we decided that we were going to get married, and the military was not a life for her. So I just moved into cadre staff of the Army Reserve for a while, and then went and got a civilian job, and just happened to find a job with an insurance company.
Okay, so a happy accident landing in the insurance space, and we'll circle back around to that, because I think you made some observations to me around transitioning in from a sort of disciplined military career and what you found when you landed there. Can I ask right up the front before we start, what's your perspective on whether leaders are born or made, Peter?
Oh, wow. And I think everyone who has had a leadership position has probably asked themselves that question. I'm not sure I've got a cogent answer for you. The one thing I would say is that I think it's more likely that they are made and that they are formed through their very early experiences. So if I think about what I believe are some of the real characteristics of good leaders, they include things like humility, empathy, curiosity, courage. And those are things I think that are formed. Those kind of characteristics are formed in your early years. So, and I've seen people in my career who have become incredible leaders, but perhaps it's taken some time for them to figure out, well, what is the model that's going to work for them? You know, what's going to feel really authentic for them. So I'd hate to think, in a way, that leaders were born, because it would actually deprive so many of, what is an amazing challenge and an amazing opportunity.
Okay, so let's move then to your career, and maybe, Peter, we'll spend some time just stepping through some of those pivotal moments that stand out for you that kind of shifted your own leadership from good to great.
Well, firstly, I sort of cringe at the concept of good to great, or even being considered in that sort of way. I think anyone who believes that they've arrived at a position of leadership is fooling themselves. It's a constant journey. You're always learning, and you should always be trying to improve. But certainly, I think some of the key moments for me, one was when I realised that I had an opportunity to shift from being what I call a technical leader, somebody who sort of almost fell into their position of leadership because of their technical skills and abilities. And that was as I transitioned from Aon Re, which was a small business, but very focused on, modelling, both financial modelling and natural peril, like as in catastrophe peril modelling. Yes. So quite sort of, I guess, cerebral. I wasn't a modeler, but I actually, I think I figured out how to actually interpret the outputs from those models in a way that could make sense for our clients. In the transition from that role to the Aon Services role, which was a much bigger people management job, I sort of realised that I couldn't continue to lead in the way that I had led. And there was an apocryphal moment in one of my very early leadership team meetings when I was trying to establish the importance of what we call now the employee value proposition. Mm-hmm. I was getting quite a lot of resistance, and so I asked one of the middle-aged white men around the table if they would actually draw the organisation as a geometric shape on the whiteboard. And after a lot of resistance, he drew what you probably would expect, which was a triangle. I asked him to identify where we were, and he drew a circle around the apex. I said, "Where are all our people?" And he drew a line across the bottom. And I said, "Well, there's the fundamental problem." And I drew the triangle up the other way, and I said, "Yes, we are at this apex, but it's at the bottom, and our role is to facilitate, to create the opportunity for everyone that's touching our clients every day to do the very best job they can for our customers." And I think that was a really important moment for me to understand that I had to find a way to leverage my leadership, whatever that meant at the time, and that meant I had to be able to deliver the results through people. And I think probably from that moment, which was the year 2000, as it turns out, I would like to think that my leadership is being characterised very much by the way that I focused on our people.
So you shared with me some extraordinary targets that you set yourself. Was that team, or was that the job after that?
No, that was that role. It wasn't that first team that I inherited. But I think what I had learned in the previous role, and I had merged two smaller companies to create one bigger company about 4 or 5 years earlier, and I had brought in an external consultant, a lady who ran a very small boutique consultancy, to do what I called then a cultural review. I wanted to understand what were the cultures of both organisations, so I could sort of think through what needed to happen for this to be a very happy marriage of yes. two very proud organisations. And through that process, I heard things like, "Oh, Peter's business plan," Peter's plan, and I realised that in fact, yes, I had built the plan, in a vacuum in my office, and I basically just delivered it to people to say, "This is what we're going to do." And I realised that I'd missed an opportunity to involve others and generate some, belief and motivation, and the absence of that, of course, it was much more difficult to mobilise the organisation. Now, as it turned out, it was a very successful business, but it was a huge learning. So when I went into the Aon Services role, a bigger platform, many more people, I took my time and I co-opted a group of I'm going to say sort of mid-level executives. That's probably not a very kind term, but they weren't my direct reports. They were people that were scattered across the organisation in quite important roles, but still had a really good connection to the employee population. And I asked them to help me think through, how we ought to design the way forward to a very different future. And we created out of that what we called our change kit. And it was a series of facts, findings, and conclusions grouped under 7 strategic business drivers. And under the business driver of, say, revenue growth, a fact might be we had no way of really understanding what our clients needed, how they used our products and services. The finding might be, well, in the absence of that, we can't focus on product development, and the conclusion therefore would be, we have no control over our revenue destiny and therefore our profitability.
Yes.
And I try to engage as many people across the organisation as I could. Some were one-on-ones and right through the spectrum to, brown bag lunches with 15 people. But I reckon I covered in excess of 95% of staff. And in so doing, I would ask them to challenge the facts and the findings and the conclusions, because if I got it wrong, or if the team had got it wrong, then the recommendation for action would be very different. So at the end of what was a 9-month process, we then designed what those recommendations for action would be. So when they came out, almost everybody in the organisation recognised them. And so there was a much higher level of buy-in. As a consequence of that, we set a 4-year plan, which included almost doubling, to increase the top line by in excess of 60% and to more than double the bottom line. And when I took it to our head office, the head office of the international business was run out of Rotterdam, of all places, at the time. And I was presenting to the chairman of the group together with the CFO, and the CFO let out an involuntary laugh at the audacity of the goals. And the chairman must have seen that I was a bit taken aback and embarrassed, and being sort of a very proper Dutch gentleman, he sought to save my embarrassment, and he said, "Look, we commend you on your ambition, and if you achieve all of that, then then we'll make sure you and the management team are well looked after." Well, I didn't think about that ever again. At the end of the first year, my CFO came to see me and said, "Look, the group CFO had asked him to put aside a provision for bonus pool and so on and so forth." And anyway, we delivered in excess of those targets within 3 years. In fact, we doubled the top line and tripled the bottom line. And I think most importantly, we improved employee engagement enormously. We didn't call it that back then, but morale certainly went through the roof. And at that time, as we closed that financial year, we were advised, my CFO and I were advised of the bonus pool that was available to my leadership team. So I got the CFO to run some numbers for me, and I went to my leadership team and said, "Look, unbeknownst to us, this provision has been set aside for the purpose of rewarding us, and if we were to do that, the bonus that each of us would receive would be equivalent to 1 year's salary. But Glenn's run the numbers, and in fact, we have enough in that pool to pay every single employee who was on the books at the close of that financial year, which was 31/12 for us, a 2-week bonus." And uniformly and instantaneously, everyone around the table said, "Well, let's do that." And it was incredible, because I think everybody felt that there was some reward for the hard work, and that it was shared in a very sort of egalitarian way.
Can I pause on that? Where do you think that egalitarian drive or desire comes from?
It's a good question. I've always been very driven by a sense of fairness, equity, maybe even justice. I don't like seeing wrong in the world. I don't think anybody does, but I don't like to walk past that kind of stuff. There was a book I'm going to say it was the 80s, it may well have been the 90s. In fact, it would have been the 90s, that I read by Ricardo Semler. And I can't remember the name of the book, but it was all about the business that he'd inherited in Brazil from his father.
Yes.
And he decided to essentially democratize the business, from decision-making to wage setting to the whole lot. And in fact, a massive risk for an owner of a business like that. There were caps on how much executives could get paid in terms of multiples of the lowest paid person in the organisation. A big chunk of the profits was always distributed amongst the staff, etc. And the engagement that very sort of fair approach engendered really inspired me. So I wouldn't say it was that alone, but it was just perhaps one sort of one factor in my thinking around sort of how do you make workplaces fairer, more equitable, where people feel that there is reward for effort. And in so doing, it raises questions around, if you're going to promote fairness and equity, then you've got to deal with poor performance and poor behaviour as well. It's a two-sided street, so to speak.
Okay, so you shared with me after you delivered that plan and delivered those incredible results, you had some questions about sort of reinventing yourself at that point, or?
Yes, I smile, but I should wince. When we did a roadshow to share the success with all of our people, I had one young fellow in Perth who said, put his hand up and he said, "Oh, it's just been amazing to be part of all of this." And, he said to me, "Peter, what comes next?" And I didn't have a what's next. I must admit, I just wanted to have a rest.
Yeah.
But it taught me a really good lesson, because I wasn't prepared for the next wave. I sort of felt like the team had delivered something really valuable, really important, but I hadn't used that time to start to think about, well, once we get the business to that level of performance, where does it go next? And I probably lost a year in maybe the best part of the year in then starting to having to start the thinking process around where to from here, once we'd already achieved something. So you do lose a little bit of momentum. There was an enormous amount of goodwill in the business, so we were able to pick that up. Where I tried to go was to take the business from a high-performing business that had really found a way of understanding its clients, its customers' needs, being very focused around high-quality services with a very strong sort of proposition for our people. I tried to take the business into what I call the purpose space, to really try and find what was our company's noble purpose. And I have to say, I didn't succeed. It was probably a really, on reflection, it didn't feel like it at the time, but on reflection, it was a really good learning opportunity. The business continued to be very successful, but it was part of my reinvention. I didn't achieve the reinvention in the remaining time I had in that role. One of the reasons it didn't succeed is because I made the same mistake I'd made nearly 10 years earlier, and I dreamt it up in my little office in the corner in the dark, right? And it was a terrible mistake to make. But essentially, I settled on a purpose that I felt described what I wanted the business to be, not what it was today. In subsequent roles, I managed to correct that mistake. But that was the reinvention took some time. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't start off terribly well.
So can we move now to London? On that journey, you took on a really big role when you got to London.
Yes, well, the London office was probably one of the most important parts of Aon's operation at the time. London, as many people will know, is the sort of centre of the insurance universe, the London market, the Lloyd's market. It's really the origins of insurance. And our London office had been sort of the jewel in the crown. It had been incredibly profitable. However, as a result of some regulatory intervention in the US, there were certain income. So I think, as many people will know, London is the centre of the insurance universe. The London and Lloyd's market, of course, are really well known. It's the origins of insurance. And Aon's London office had been the jewel in the crown for many years. And of course, the entire network relied very heavily on London, because many of their more difficult placements, insurance placements, needed to go through that brokerage to get into the London underwriting market. Unfortunately, there had been some regulatory changes in the US which impacted all the global brokers' operations around the kinds of income that they could earn. And so certain income streams became illegal. And as a consequence, there was an overnight change to Aon UK's economic model. And over the next sort of 3 years or so, they've been unable to adjust their business model to sort of fit the new economics. And the then CEO had been in the role for 25 years. And I think there was a view that it was very hard to change something dramatically that you built for that period of time. So the global CEO asked me at very short notice if I would move to London and take on this role, which I did. And, so I was there for about 6 months before my wife and daughter arrived, although my eldest son did come across in the second month or something, which was nice to have a bit of time with him. So, yeah.
That's great. So you arrived. Tell me about that, because it was very different than the way you worked previously.
Yes. Look, the London market. I had dealt in the London market for many, many years. So I think that's one of the reasons why the group CEO decided to ask me to take on that role, was that I knew enough about the marketplace, but not enough to be considered an insider. So I could bring a fresh set of eyes. It all happened rather suddenly for the CEO who was exiting, and that was rather difficult because I'd always sort of considered him to be somewhat of a mentor, and we'd had a very close working relationship over years, so that was quite challenging. And I basically arrived on a Saturday, and on the Monday morning I turned up to work. Now, Aon's offices were in a compound, and the compound comprised about 6 or 7 buildings, and Aon occupied about 4 of them. There was a gatehouse at the front that had 2 apartments, and I lived in one of those apartments for a few weeks. It's like found somewhere more permanent. But the main, the other buildings right across from that had 5 floors, and then there were other bigger buildings dotted around the compound. So that building with 5 floors, the very top floor was the executive floor, and the other floors comprised the reinsurance division, which was sort of, I guess, the higher profile of the businesses in the London operation. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm at my new desk, and there was a tap on the glass panel beside the door, and there was a chap standing there in a white tunic with grey and white checked trousers. And he said, "Good morning, sir." "Good morning." He said, "Sir, my name is Rodney." I said, "Who are you, Rodney?" He said to me, "I'm your personal chef." He said, "Would sir like breakfast?" I said, "I've already had my breakfast, thanks, Rodney." And I watched that morning as the executives came in one by one through to about 10:30 and got served a full cooked breakfast in their offices. And this is a company that is losing money, like as in bleeding cash, was described as technically insolvent by the Financial Services Authority, which was the then regulator. And when I left that building later in the day to walk across to the other buildings where all of our brokers were, I counted 17 Mercedes-Benz limos in the quadrangle waiting to pick up their charges to take them home. So the first set of decisions I made that week was to close the executive floor. And we basically refitted that as what we called a client suite. So we basically put in a commercial kitchen, some dining rooms, and lots of client rooms. Yes. And I asked every executive that had previously occupied space in that floor to insert themselves onto a trading floor where our brokers were. Our brokers were sitting in cramped conditions, cheek to jowl. The air conditioning barely worked, so in summer it was stiflingly hot. In winter it was freezing. If you didn't get to use the bathroom before 10 o'clock, the advice was don't bother, go home. It was just dreadful. I mean, you could just imagine those conditions. And I'd also come to an arrangement with the CFO that we then put to the 16 of the 17 drivers, that they could buy their cars at book value, which was a significant benefit, and that we would provide them with a minimum of 6 months guaranteed work to help them set up their own chauffeur business. 11 of the 16 took the offer, took the car, and 5 decided that they would just go and do something else. And the one that I couldn't essentially get rid of was contractually provided to the deputy chairman, who was my number 2. So, and he was unwilling to let the car and driver go, and contractually I couldn't force him. But what he did agree to was to turn that into a company asset as opposed to a private sort of asset. And so, I think that the closure of the executive floor, the build out of the client suite, the getting rid of some of the trappings of executive largesse, together with the executives now being on trading floors, it sent a pretty strong message that things had to change.
And I imagine you saw some turnover in those executive levels?
Yes, it was interesting. And knowing that we were talking today, I was just sort of reflecting on that time again this morning. And those executives, by and large, were very gracious. I look back now and think actually it could have been far more difficult. Many of them realised by the end of that first week that the extent of change that was coming was not going to make them very comfortable. The London insurance market is actually a very lucrative place to work. It can be, and these guys have been well remunerated over the years. Every single one of them except one chose to move on, and they did so in a extremely respectful and thoughtful way. And so I really am sort of grateful for the way that they ported themselves through that challenging time. I guess what I hadn't realised when all of that occurred, and it happened pretty quickly, was that the next cadre of leaders, in some ways, many of them had built up expectations of living the same life that these chaps, and they were predominantly men,
yes,
were now leaving. And so I thought I was on the way to a solution, but in fact, all I'd done is push the problem a little further down the road, and not completely, but by and large, I would say more than half of the next group of leaders ended up moving on within the next 12 months as well, because really I hadn't solved the problem. I just given it a different face and a different name.
What did you take out of that whole experience? What do you think were some of the biggest leadership learnings that you lent on from that experience?
I think, well, one of them is people are watching everything you do. And you have to realise that even on weekends, my wife used to get amazed that, just the number of people you would bump into walking down the street. So you're always on show. There's never a moment when you are not in your role. And you really need to be mindful of that. And therefore, things that you do, and just as importantly, things that you don't do, send very strong messages around what's important. And so when I went to staff to say, we have some really tough things that we have to do because economically our business is not sustainable, and we're going to find this quite challenging, I think I'd like to believe that I started with a bit of credibility because I'd sorted out some of the biggest problems that they could see looking up. It was just the fact that the fat cats, so to speak, weren't prepared to take any of their own hard medicine. And so, I think that was really important. I think I shared with you also that at the end of my first month, my first management meeting, through a rather circuitous route, I discovered that we had a pretty significant problem in the lack of proper controls, risk controls, around the way we engage third parties to help source business in different parts of the world. And that led to a disclosure to the FSA, led to a 2.5-year investigation that covered 6 different international jurisdictions, including the US under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and in the UK under the anti-bribery laws. It led to 12,000 payments to third parties being reviewed. 343 of them were considered suspicious on deeper review by an external law firm. 48 of those were what we called toxic, which meant that there was a serious problem, either proven bribery or a suspicion deeply sort of held, enough for us to take action on. It led to 7 separate notifications to the Serious Organised Crime Authority. It led to a series of security risks for me personally and the family. Obviously, I had to stop payments to third parties. These third parties, in many cases, had made forward promises of money to come to people who had done favours for them in some of these jurisdictions. And they were now very scared, right? So, we've now seen this play out with other companies, and certainly in the insurance space, we've seen almost all of the major London-based brokerages have to. We'll go through something similar. Most of that occurred, 8, 9, 10 years ago. But I think because of the anti-tipping off laws, I couldn't actually disclose any facts to anyone outside of my legal team, which meant that the group CEO had to be essentially kept in the dark. Our group general counsel was very particular to ensure that he didn't become like a fact witness, which was highly understandable. So it felt like a pretty lonely period of time. Again, I think some key lessons for me were around, I guess there were two that really spring out. One is it's very easy in a situation like that to trust no one and to, sort of hiding within your shell. But actually, if you sort of think a bit more expansively around what you're facing into and you look a bit more expansively at those around you, you can figure out who are the ones that you really can trust. And just as importantly, those that perhaps you shouldn't. And I think the other lesson for me was just when you think you are at your breaking point, you find another reservoir of energy and commitment. And I think it just says to me that people are more resilient than they believe, they could be when they're faced, up against it.
Peter, what an incredible time. And, we know that the CEO roles can be very lonely anyway, but to be completely isolated like that, in terms of cut off from those support networks, and for you to kind of vulnerably share, you get to those moments where you think, have I got, what it takes to get through this? Did you have moments on the way through where you thought, am I up to this?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, I think that sort of self-doubt in some ways fell into two buckets. One was, have I missed something in understanding the actual issues that have taken place? This is, if I haven't, then this has been going on for decades and it's a market problem, right? If I have, I could potentially be killing a business for the wrong reasons, right? So again, you lean heavily on people like, well, in this situation, our internal and external lawyers. I needed to continue to sort of check almost my own sanity. Some of this stuff was so out of anything that you would expect to find in a business, right? It was stuff that movies are made of, right?
I was going to say, it's a movie script.
Yeah. So you often wonder if, is it real, or am I sort of, creating this problem? And then the other bucket of self-doubt, of course, is, am I going to be able to see this through? What does the other side look like? Who am I going to become? We ended up resolving the challenge, and the group CEO asked me to take on another role, which would be even more global in nature. And it would have meant me being on the road about 3 weeks of the month. And I'd already spent an awful lot of time on the road to and fro the US, etc. And I was quite excited about it, but I went home to talk to my wife about it. And I said, well, look, the boss has offered me this role. And she could see I was super excited, and her eyes started to well up. And I said, I realized straight away, I was just thinking about myself, I was super excited. And I said to her, what would you like to do? And she just said to me, I'd like to go home. And so that's what we did. I said, well, I'm going to ring the boss now and tell him we're going home. She said, no. She said, look, we should think about it. We should. And I said, no. I knew intuitively straight away that I had completely underestimated the impact of that 3 years as it was on her. And as a consequence, I didn't feel all that wonderful about the person I had become because of, well, I shouldn't blame the process. I'd let myself, I guess, get into that situation. But so I rang the group CEO that night and I said, look, we've talked about it and actually we want to go home. He was amazing. I mean, just amazing. And I did learn an awful lot from Greg Case. He continues as the CEO of Aon today. He's in his 17th or 18th year. An amazing human being. But he was very generous. He helped us get back to Australia. He was keen for me to do some kind of global role from Sydney. And, I think I desperately wanted that. I'd had 23 years with Aon, but after the Christmas break, I sort of realised that, minister without portfolio, it's, slow and agonising death. So we finally agreed that we would part company, and we did so on the best of terms.
So then you commenced your sort of final CEO phase anyway, with a couple of CEO roles in the Australian market.
All with the same company, IAG. So yes, I had known Mike Wilkins for many years. Mike was the then CEO of IAG, and he asked me if I would consider taking on the role of CEO of CGU. And CGU had been led by Duncan West, a good friend for the previous 2.5 years. But Duncan was Sydney-based, as I was, had 2 young children, and was keen to sort of spend more time in Sydney. And so it was a very sort of easy decision for me, because knowing both of them, I knew that Duncan, would have a good plan. He'd be on a good path, and I knew CGU very well. And CGU always had an excellent reputation with its own people, with its customers, a very strong connection with rural and regional communities, very strong in the SME business sector. So Duncan was halfway through a 5-year turnaround program, and the backstory is CGU was purchased in 2003 by IAG. So this is now the end of 2010. CGU had been purchased in 2003 by IAG, and I don't think the management of IAG, which was predominantly a home and motor and direct-to-customer business model, really understood the intricacies or the vagaries of a business that was largely commercial and largely distributed through insurance brokers. And as such, I think it had been starved of investment, and perhaps the leadership team wasn't able to mount the right case. But either which way, not only had performance been tracking south for some time, morale was in a pretty bad place as well. And Duncan said to me that if he was going to stay, he felt that this moment in time was the right one in which to reevaluate the progress under this massive 5-year transformation program. And to put it into context, it sounds small beer today, but back then it was a lot of money. It was 250 million that they had approval to invest over that period. And I guess what I found when I got to CGU was a very downtrodden organisation with great people who were demoralised. And 3 months earlier, they had been part of a leadership offsite that Mike had run, and it was a strategy meeting. It was buy, hold or sell various assets, and they went through the assets as to whether they should buy, scale up or invest or to sell. And when they got to CGU, all bar the 9 executives from CGU who were at the group, so 57 executives voted to sell CGU. So that was the feeling of rejection that the leadership team were facing. And so, I took the opportunity to, take Duncan at his word, pause Project Apollo as it was known, and reevaluate it. My assessment was that Apollo started, like most programs, it had grown in scope over the 2.5 years, and it had lost a bit of focus, and there was a lot of money being frittered away at the edges. We weren't getting enough traction on the things that really moved the needle. So we very quickly just reprioritised. I didn't want to do a stop, change direction. There was a little bit of momentum. I wanted to build on that. And so even though if you look back now, you might say, well, actually it pretty much was stop, change direction, but I hope it didn't feel like that at the time, and we narrowed in on the 3 or 4 key things that we had to get right. And we sort of cut a lot of the surplus energy that was being wasted out. I also sort of built the platform for change, for recommitting to the task at hand on our leaders' sense of commitment and obligation to their people. So I said to them, if we don't think we can get this company into a sustainable economic position, then the best thing is to sell the business. And that's exactly what we should tell the group CEO. But that means that we think somebody else's management team can do a better job with what are industry-leading assets than we can. And I, for one, don't want to
do that.
do that. And so it was interesting to see how quickly that galvanised people. And so the sort of the mantra, if you like, to support the effort was around earning our rights of self-determination. And that became sort of, I think, the rallying cry. And the fact that the reason that was important is because if we had mastery over our own destiny, then in fact we could be much more certain that we could look after our people. and that was really what it was all about. So the financial year prior to me taking over, the business had lost $4 million in pre-tax money, and when we closed out the 5-year program 2.5 years after doing the reset, we made $480 million in pre-tax profit. And again, learning.
Small turnaround then, Peter. Small turnaround.
Well, I'm sure there are many people out there that said, look, it would have happened anyway. But it was wonderful to be a part of, because you could just see the pride in people's faces. You know, the original goal was to generate $500 million, you know, in pre-tax profits set 5 years earlier, but $200 million of that was earmarked for an acquisition. Right. And one of the first things I did is to say, we are in no state to buy something, right? So let's take the 200 million. So the target became 300 million, no acquisition. We need to just focus on getting our own house in order. So we did exceed the target, and taking a lesson from the Aon experience, where sharing the bonus pool really did generate the next level of sort of motivation and mobilization. The public company setting, I couldn't do what I was able to do back in Aon, in a subsidiary of a, you know, small subsidiary of a big multinational, but we were able to provide a CGU debit card that had a not insignificant amount of cash on it for everything. It was the same for everybody. And again, it was the same thing. It was the fact that I think that the company had thought to share some of the spoils with people. It could have been more or less money, I suspect, and the impact would probably have been the same. Again, learning from my mistake, or one of my many mistakes at Aon, before we closed out the 5-year program, we had relaunched the next one. So I always had that mental model of the sigmoid curve, you know, to start the next wave of change before you finally delivered the last elements of the last sort of change.
And not lose the time like you did the first time round. Peter, I haven't asked you, you know, there's a overriding sense of fairness that comes through in the approach that you've taken in each of your leadership roles. I haven't asked you about diversity yet, and I'd just love to turn our mind to that. And, you know, I think we're still not quite seeing the outcomes that we would hope with females moving into sort of certainly CEO roles, but senior executive roles. What's your perspective on that? You know, what perhaps did you try to do in your career? And if I can wrap another question in as well, if you can remember them all, do you think you need to sponsor females differently to males?
Yeah, okay. So maybe it's a bit of a stream of consciousness here. Firstly, early on, when companies began to at least get serious about the thinking required to tackle the diversity challenge, there was a lot of almost sort of rationale being generated about sort of the economic benefits of diverse teams making better decisions, and yeah, I buy all of that. But if that's the reason for doing it, then we should be ashamed.
Right.
We shouldn't be looking at economic drivers to do what is just right. And Brian Swartz said to me, who was the then chairman of IAG, he said he always thought about this through the eyes of his daughters. You know, why should his daughters have less opportunities or have to work harder for the same opportunities than his son did, right? And that got me thinking. I thought that, and foolishly, that I was reasonably liberated, can I use that word, in my thinking around this space. And then I did the Harvard Online unconscious bias survey, and the results of that horrified me. I was quite distressed when I realised the extent of the biases that I carry. And I had a coach as part of a group-wide leadership development program at the time, and she was amazing. She was brutal with me, but she was amazing. And she sort of really helped me unpack, you know, why those biases existed and where they might have come from by going back, you know, through much of my history and particularly back to my childhood. And one of the earliest memories I have is walking to church with my parents in our country town. My sister was beside me, and my baby sister was in the pram, in the pusher behind me. And next thing I know, I get a clip over the side of the head. I turn around to my father, who was a very austere Methodist, just turned 90 on Sunday, and he still is, right? Lovely man. But he clipped me over the head to get my attention. I turned around sort of with a few tears in my eyes, wondering what I'd done wrong. And he said to me, "Get on the curbside of your sister." Because the gentleman takes the splash from the passing car, right? So I came to understand that I had always seen in one of my many roles in life was to protect the women around me.
Yes.
And, you know, the way that played out in business was that if I was to have the same conversation with a male executive and a female executive, the male executive would probably walk out of the room going, "Well, that was bloody clear."
Yeah.
And the female executive would walk out going, "What was all that about?" Because I think what I unconsciously did was try not to upset them, was to try and protect them.
Soften the blow or whatever.
Yeah. And I guess maybe, you know, you grow up playing sport, maybe you're just more used to having those direct and challenging conversations with men than you are with women. But look, my first reaction was just shame. You know, I was really distressed. And then I realized actually we are who we are as a function of our life experiences, and we can't change those life experiences. But once you know what your biases are, then if you don't do something about it, that's when you should feel shame. And so with my coach, I worked on a number of triggers, and I had to consciously for a long time think about activating those triggers to make sure that I didn't, you know, inadvertently disadvantage women because of the way I treated them versus men. Other things that we did, I had as a young lady by the name, she'll love the fact that I call her a young lady, I'm sure, Rebecca Isaacson, who for me was the model of, she and her then manager were the model of how to successfully integrate having children with having a career. And so I spent some time talking with her to understand. So she had basically had 3 children and had successfully returned to her role and been promoted in the meantime and so on and so forth, and had done it incredibly well. So I really wanted to understand what had gone right for her, and maybe, you know, what could be better, but certainly there were lots of things going right for her. Our own data showed us that oftentimes women who had had a child came back, but didn't come back after their second child. Yes. And sort of the anecdotal learning at the time was that by the time you had 2 children, the cost of childcare meant that there was very little economic return in coming back to work. And therefore, if you couldn't get your other needs satisfied, then what was the point? And what Rebecca helped me see was that, and let me describe what her model was. Before she went off on each of those 3 maternity leaves, I should call it parental leaves, I'm sorry, that's just showing my age, isn't it? She would sit down with her manager and they would have a conversation around how he was going to keep her up to date without intruding on her life while she was at home. And the rationale was that everything was changing so fast all of the time. If she came back in 12 months' time, she may not recognise the place that she'd left.
Absolutely.
So her manager religiously, he put in a call, I think it was every week. I encouraged people to make a commitment that they could actually keep. He was one out of a box, I suspect, right? But maybe it's every fortnight, maybe it's every month. The point is the person who's taking the parental leave has to decide that, right? But the manager then has to commit to following through. And it could be just a quick 10 or 15 minute call. Even things like retaining access to the intranet. So when you're scrolling on your social media, if you choose to have a look at the company intranet, you can actually see who's doing what and how the company's traveling and stay in touch. So the other thing that we introduced that as a playbook, a parental leave playbook, was, you know, based on the Rebecca Isaacson story. You know, how managers needed to create those kind of opportunities. Now, an employee may say, "I'm not interested. I don't want to hear from you." Well, that's fine. At least we've tried to give you, you know, the option. And I'm sure there are things that we could have done better, but I do think it was a step forward. The other thing, well, there's a couple of other things that we did that I think were important. I also realised that when the business came under stress, which is all the time, right? There's always something happening. We often called meetings at 7:30, 8 o'clock or 6 p.m. at night. Well, that disadvantaged so many, more often women than men, right? Because, you know, rightly or wrongly, you know, women continue to be predominantly the primary caregivers. I know it is rebalancing, but it's still the case. And so we were putting women in an invidious position. Either they couldn't attend and therefore they looked like they didn't care, or they did attend and it caused them untold amounts of stress trying to work out what to do. Could I get grandma to come over? Can I impose upon my husband, whose job's so important, to get home and, get the kids from school? So we said, no meetings before 10 and none that finish after 4. Right now, every now and again, particularly for my leadership team, there was a crunch session, but we would then try and do it so that someone could phone in after the crisis hour with, between dinner and bedtime and so on. So that was really important. The other thing that I noticed happening was if a manager sometimes would take one of their male employees out for a drink after work, but oftentimes they wouldn't take, if it was a male manager, wouldn't take a female employee. For 2 reasons, I guess, maybe for many, but one, either or both might have been a bit uncomfortable in that situation. It's silly, isn't it, right? Someone looks at 2 colleagues male colleagues having a drink and they go, well, it's 2 male colleagues having a drink. Yes. Someone has a look at a male colleague and a female colleague having a drink and suddenly there's another story, right? It's actually a bit sickening. So in those casual interactions, relationships are formed, information transfers from one to the other. The people are advantaged in that model, and those that can't participate in that kind of information transfer are disadvantaged. And so, we had to try and find a way of at least just ventilating that as an issue, and that if managers, we didn't want to stop managers catching up socially with people, but they had to work out a way to make sure they had an inclusive model, not an exclusive model. So those were the other thing. Sorry. Probably the last thing, there's probably many more, but the last thing that comes to mind is I also observed that while people were on parental leave, they were essentially out of sight, out of mind, and they weren't considered for promotional opportunities. And as part of the parental leave playbook, we included a requirement that was actually audited to ensure that people who were not at work for whatever reason, carers leave or parental leave, were considered for those opportunities. I'm pleased to say that quite a number of people who were on parental leave actually received promotions and pay rises whilst they were, away from the office.
Fantastic. Peter, it just, as I was listening to that, I was reflecting back on 2 things: fairness, but also a quality you singled out earlier in our conversation around curiosity. And and I think that, just what you've talked through there just demonstrates a real curiosity from you to understand how to make a real impact and a change. And I think that's just an enormous insight for people watching this. Peter, I would love to ask you the final question I ask of everybody, and that is, from your perspective, what does brave feminine leadership mean? And do you think it needs to change?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, starting first of all, perhaps with just brave leadership. I mean, if I go back to some of those characteristics that I talked about earlier, I think having a curious mind, being empathetic, or being prepared to share vulnerabilities. People want to be able to relate to you, and they need to know who you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Having courage, to back yourself. You have reached a position of leadership because someone somewhere has observed that people are prepared to follow you. So if there's no followership, there's no leadership, right? So what is it that makes you followable, right? It is probably, I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's because people trust that you're going to look after them, and in whatever that actually means. And so being brave to look after them, having the courage to take the hard decisions, to know, to recognize that, happy customers are only served by happy people, right? So how is it that you can motivate and therefore mobilize people and help them find meaning in what it is that they do? And so I think that's brave leadership, because it means, in essence, that you've got to be looking for change. Progress isn't made without change, right? Change for change's sake is just energy sapping. And so there has to be purpose about the change. And that's why we need brave leaders, right? We just cannot stand still. If I then sort of insert the word feminine into that definition, I think that women have an opportunity to be far more in control, perhaps, than some are prepared to realise. And even if we just reflect on some of the things that we've talked about, being able to call out those I'm going to call them unconscious practices in the system. The sad thing is some of them are probably very conscious, but I won't go there. That will sound a bit churlish. Yes. But the things that actually militate against you developing as a leader, the exclusionary practices that are systemic in many organisations, recognise them for what they are, call them out. You don't need to stop them, but you need to find, and be good if you could, but you need to find an alternative way for you to be included, right? And, you know, it'd be nice to think that leaders out there, male or female, recognise that without any prompting, but that's just not going to be the case. Many of them will need prompting. And so be brave and say, you know, I want to take control of my leadership journey. And to do that, I need to have conversations with you that cover off these things. And it might well be, you know, how I'm going to get access to information, how I'm going to get access to promotional opportunities, how we're going to manage the distribution of work so that when I need to flex my ability to put in the hours based on what's happening in my broader life, whether you're male or female, that applies. Then you know, being in a position where you can actually have those conversations. I think, you know, if you weren't brave, if you were passive, you would be waiting for somebody to do it for you. You'd be waiting a very long time, unfortunately. So be brave, get on the front foot, recognise that a lot of it is actually within your control.
Peter, thank you for an extraordinary conversation, and congratulations on a wonderful career that now continues in a governance perspective. But I'm so thrilled to have had you join the conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you for talking with me.